This year, a major war movie, Pressure, is coming out this year. We've already talked about it in another video here, but it's a movie that highlights the events of the last days leading up to D-Day, right? On June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy, the largest amphibious invasion in history. So, in those last days, there were really moments of high tension, right? Or high pressure, as the movie's title suggests to us. And this moment was led by the meteorologist, the chief meteorologist involved in planning Operation Overlord, Group Captain James Stagg. So, you've probably already seen that it's the actor Andrew Scott who will play James Stagg on screen in this movie. But do you know who the real James Stagg was? Stay with us to find out. A baby named James Martin Stagg was born on June 30, 1900 in a small village near Edinburgh called Musselburgh in Scotland. He was the son of Alexander Kern Stagg, who worked as a plumber, and his wife Ellen Martin Stagg. Shortly after baby James was born, the couple moved to Dalkeith, a village a bit larger than the one where the baby was born, so that he could study at a good school. A school in Dalkeith, and it was there that he continued studying until he was 15 years old. After he turned 15, the family moved again, this time to Edinburgh itself, so that young James could finish high school there. We can already see that James Stagg was a kind of straight A student, because in 1921, at the age of 21, he had already earned his degree from the University of Edinburgh. And look, the very next year he became a science teacher at the prestigious George Heriot School, which is also located in the Scottish capital. In 1923 then, Professor Stagg became a second lieutenant. He enrolled in the Officer Training Corps, which is the Officer Training Corps of the British Army, so that he could precisely represent the school's contingent in the program. And then, in the following year, 1924, he became an assistant at the British Meteorological Office, finally starting his career in the science that would put his name in history. In that position, over the next decade, James Stagg became an increasingly important figure in British meteorology. And in 1932, between 1932 and 1933, he would lead the British Polar Expedition, which would explore the Canadian Arctic region. The following year, 1934, he then earns his doctorate, right? He receives his doctorate from the University of Edinburgh, defending a thesis on terrestrial magnetism. At 37 years old, in 1937, James Stagg is awarded the OBE, or Order of the British Empire, which is the most prestigious, with an award for civil and military merit, also from Great Britain, right? At the rank of officer. He received this award precisely because of the importance of the work he had been doing as a senior technician at the Meteorological Office of the Air Ministry. That is the Air Ministry, the government office overseeing the Royal Air Force. And all this professional brilliance of James Stagg was consolidated in 1939 when he was made superintendent. Superintendent of the King's Observatory, or Kew Observatory, also known as Kew Observatory, which is located in London. And at the time, it was the most prestigious British scientific unit dealing with astronomical observation and also monitoring of Earth's magnetism. In other words, in that position, James Stagg had already become the leading British authority in meteorology, right? Which meant he was now splitting his time between meteorology and astronomy. In 1939, World War II also began over there in Europe. And as the conflict progressed, in 1941, the Americans got involved in the war. And from 1942 on then, the alliance between the United States and Great Britain already established that the main goal of these two countries would be to cross the English Channel and carry out a major amphibious invasion of northwestern Europe. It was through this invasion that Germany would then be forced into its final defeat. However, the campaign in North Africa and the Mediterranean delayed this invasion from 1942 until 1944. But by the end of 1943, the command responsible for planning the upcoming invasion of northwest France was established in England. At that same time, a region of the French coast known as Normandy was chosen as the site for this invasion, which was expected to be truly massive. And for this invasion to be successful, a series of weather conditions had to be met. Since the invasion would involve a large number of ships concentrated in a very small area of the ocean, calm seas were necessary, or absolutely essential for this kind of operation. So, any time of year that was too far from the European summer was considered inappropriate for an invasion of this scale. General weather conditions and cloud cover were also crucial to the success of the invasion, because low clouds affect the conditions for adequate air cover for the amphibious operations. So the storm season that builds in early autumn in that area should also be avoided. And finally, a very specific tide regime to facilitate the landing, as well as a full moon to allow the pilots and paratroopers to see their targets. During the nighttime actions, these completed the set of requirements, making the European summer the only time considered safe to carry out the invasion. And, as you can see, meteorology was therefore a determining factor in choosing the date and also for the final authorization for the invasion to actually take place. Therefore, it was necessary to establish a highly capable meteorological advisory team with the Allied High Command for the invasion. Thus, on November 6, 1943, James Stagg, who was already working as a civil servant within the Air Ministry, received a special commission in the Royal Air Force at the rank of Group Captain, equivalent to a colonel, so that he could have full access to the Allied High Command facilities. And, despite Washington's insistence on having an American meteorologist take on this responsibility, the British ended up prevailing, with the argument that only an experienced British meteorologist would know how to interpret the peculiarities of the weather on the islands and also on the European continent. The invasion was then scheduled for June 5, 1944, and, according to the plan, which had been in place since January of that year, all contingents had been embarked at their respective ports and ready to depart 48 hours before that date. Everything was going very well until, at 3 o'clock on June 3, 1944, a young 21-year-old meteorologist named Maureen Sweeney arrived with a worrying weather report in her hands. Sweeney's report said that a huge storm was moving at that moment toward the French coast and would probably hit the Normandy region throughout the following days during the entire next week. This would cause a 15-day delay for the invasion until the tides matched the desired pattern again. However, in that 15-day window ahead, the full moon would be completely lost for carrying out the invasion, making it impossible for the pilots and paratroopers to see anything on the ground below. This forecast then unleashed a real whirlwind of clashes in the Allied High Command, with several authorities wanting to cancel the operation altogether, at least for the next 15 days, and others insisting on a reassessment of the situation. James Stagg was given the task of verifying the validity of Sweeney's weather report, and in doing so, he confirmed the accuracy of his young colleague's information. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, then decided to postpone the operation by 24 hours, based on a suggestion from James Stagg himself to monitor developments over the next 24 hours. Thus, On the morning of June 4, 1944, the core of the action moved from southern England to northern Scotland, more specifically to the island of Tiree, which is located on the west coast of Scotland. And there was the headquarters of RAF Squadron Number 518, a meteorological reconnaissance squadron equipped with 4-engine aircraft. Handley Page Halifax, which it had been, they had been withdrawn from the RAF Bomber Command, which by that time was using only the Avro Lancaster for its bombing operations over the continent. And therefore, these Halifax were stripped of any equipment related to bombing operations in order to increase their range on long journeys over the North Atlantic, journeys that sometimes lasted up to 10 hours. Squadron 518 had to fly its missions regardless of the weather, whether it was sunny, raining, very windy, at night, or during the day. And the high danger of this environment claimed no less than 10 aircraft and 54 men throughout the year 1944. And on that June 4th, once again, the Allied High Command could count on the valuable services of the Halifax aircraft from Squadron 518 because one of these aircraft, flying about 1,000 kilometers west of the coast of Ireland, made a low-altitude reading above the Atlantic Ocean, showing that the atmospheric pressure in that region had increased considerably since the last reading. That measurement was then delivered to James Stagg, who, based on his scientific knowledge and his vast personal experience with the climate of that region of Europe, determined that there was a high possibility the storm would subside within the next 24 hours. That forecast was then presented to General Eisenhower on the night of that June 4th. And on the night of that June 4th, Eisenhower gave the green light for Operation Overlord to be carried out in the early hours of the day. June 6, 1944. The interesting thing is that it was precisely the Allies' overwhelming military advantage, which controlled the entire North Atlantic area, that allowed those meteorological survey flights to be carried out. The Germans, on the other hand, who had much more limited access to that region, were unable to make those surveys and did not have access to that data. And so they predicted that for the next 15 days, there would be no possibility of an Allied invasion of the French coast because a major storm was approaching that region. And it was exactly because of that weather forecast that Marshal Erwin Rommel, commander of Army Group B, felt secure enough to leave his command post on the beaches and visit his wife Lucy back in Germany so they could celebrate her birthday together on June 6, 1944. In the end, James Stagg's forecast was extremely accurate because on June 19, the storm came back stronger than ever. A real typhoon took over the entire Normandy region, even destroying the American Mulberry Harbor that had been set up on Omaha Beach. This storm affected all the supply lines of the Allied forces on land, and even delayed the progress of official operations, Montgomery's offensives. And only after it dissipated on the 22nd could the damage be properly assessed and repairs begin. For his extremely important service to the planning of Operation Overlord and the highly accurate weather forecasts, demonstrating great professional expertise in meteorology, James Stagg was awarded the Legion of Merit, an American military decoration for professionalism for military officers, in October 1945. After the war, back in civilian life, he became director of the British Meteorological Office, a position he held until 1960. And in 1954, his professional merits were once again recognized by the British state with the Royal Decoration of the Order of the Bath. Finally, in 1959, crowning his brilliant career, he was made president of the Royal Meteorological Society. James Stagg passed away on June 23, 1975, just 1 week before turning 75 years old. So now that you've learned the whole true story of James Stagg, the man behind the most important weather report of the 20th century, are you more excited to watch the movie Pressure? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want to learn more great military stories, I've got a great tip for you, okay? Which is my book right here, Atom as a Weapon, that will tell you the whole story of the development and use of atomic bombs in World War II. Here you'll find the personal stories of the main characters, the reasons behind all the decisions that were made, and also how the bombings were finally carried out. You can find this book here at the We Clap store through the link in the description or by the QR code on the screen. But if you want your autographed copy signed with a dedication to you by me, just send an email to saladagera@gmail.com with your zip code so I can calculate the shipping.
Frete.